Good afternoon. Welcome back. Doug Pagitt Radio and AM 950, the Progressive Voice of Minnesota. DougPagittRadio.com. Religious radio that's not quite right. Sometimes it's not all that religious. Sometimes it's not politically right.
You know what I've noticed?
All the time it's not politically right.
Your skin is looking really good today.
My skin?
Your skin.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm looking lively, or I'm looking.
It's smooth. It's not splotchy like it normally is. There's no blemishes. Have you been doing something with your regimen there? Or?
No, I have not changed a thing in my bathing or skin treatment regimen.
Really, it's looking remarkably well, my friend.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Thank you. I'm having a good skin day. Maybe I got a little color. Perhaps that's it.
Yeah.
From riding on the motorcycle. Mm. Maybe that's it. I got a little color from being out in the sun, and maybe it's just evened out the blotchiness.
I think that's what I need, Doug. I need a little motorcycle sun. What do you think, Naomi?
Apparently, you two have a thing going on about you don't want him to have a motorcycle, because I've been picking that up. He said something about a motorcycle.
Picking that up because I've been laying it down pretty hard.
Your head, yeah.
She doesn't make many demands on me, but no motorcycle is.
No motorcycles.
Yeah.
Hey, there was a big story that came out of one of my favorite radio programs. Called This American Life. This American Life is broadcast by public radio, some variety. I don't know which stream of public radio, but it's a great little show. I've been listening to it for years. Really care for it. And back in January, they had a story. You might remember this story. Mm-hmm. They had a story about how iPads, iPhones, MacBooks are created, made, assembled in China. And there was a fella who gave a report, and it really stirred up a lot of tension. Really had people. A lot of folks passed it on to me because they know that I work in social media areas and I like technologies, and I have an iPhone and I have a MacBook and I'm an Apple guy, right? Mm-hmm. So in that branding, I do the Apple thing, and so people were attentive to sharing that. And there was all this worry about how workers in China were treated because of this report.
Yeah, it was the most downloaded This American Life program in history.
Yeah, amazing, right? Like a lot of people joined in. It caused a national stir.
Sure.
Because this fella said in his story, he stood at the gates of a place where they make iPhones and iPads, a place called Foxconn. And he said that he stood there and he saw the armed guards out in front. You might remember this part of the story. Saw armed guards and created the impression that the workers inside couldn't leave and outsiders couldn't go in.
Yeah.
He told the story about meeting 13-year-old, 12-year-old, 14-year-old workers who were having to work 60, 80 hours a week. He told the story of meeting a man whose hand had been mangled in a machine and had making an iPad, and that he had never actually seen an iPad, so took his mangled hand after he lost his job because he could no longer work and was given no medical care, and he showed him an iPad, and the man used his hand. Very, very dramatic story.
Yeah.
He told the story of meeting people who had been poisoned by a chemical that they used to clean the surfaces of the iPad screens, and that these were neurotoxins, and these people would shake uncontrollably, and they would they couldn't hold a glass of water because they were poisoned by this. And he raised the idea: do you want to use devices that you buy that are causing this kind of wreckage in the lives of people? Very moving, very important story. Well, apparently, as it turns out, the fella whose story was used in This American Life, this was a stage production, and this fellow was using the license of historic fiction, one might say, to tell this story. That he didn't actually see any guards at that place. He never actually met 12-year-olds. The man whose hand was mangled wasn't mangled by working at an iPad factory.
Right.
That he never met anyone who was poisoned in this way. But he had heard reports, so he'd put together a one-man show to try to tell the story of what happens across the system of manufacturing. But he pulled that all together into a first-person narrative.
Right.
And the people at This American Life were told explicitly by this fella that these things he actually saw, they actually happened. And what takes place in the This American Life story is presented as journalism, but the man had written it as a stage production of art to try to tap into the emotion of how would you feel. But these things were true while they didn't actually happen. This kind of narrative, right?
Yeah, those reports were out there, those things happening, but his entire report was a fabrication.
He fabricated that he saw them happen. So it put then This American Life, who sent their own reporters into do a little more due diligence after airing it, into the predicament of realizing that they had been lied to by this fellow.
Right.
Like they asked, could we follow up with your translator who you said in China was with you? And as it turns out, he said, well, she can't be found anymore. And she was found really quite easily. So he was hiding her.
Yeah.
So it's a very sad story because it shows that this guy, at a minimum, crossed genre of sort of the artistic expression of how you tell of a plight with journalism, and he knew that This American Life was a journalistic approach, and the fellow was using first-person narrative and never ever qualifying. No, I didn't actually see that. In fact, on news reports on other news programs, this fellow's name is Mike Daisey. He went on to say explicitly, "I saw this happen."
Yeah.
He didn't see, and he admits now he didn't see it happen, but he was trying to use this language of the theater to try to make the point that he was trying to make. Well, this is a big news story right now. This American Life, a great story. Its weekend show this weekend is the retraction of this January 3rd report.
The first time they've ever had to do this,
they've ever had to do
a retraction.
They're bothered. I mean, I'm frankly bothered that they didn't do the level of due diligence. They're bothered that they didn't do the level of due diligence. They presented this not as commentary, not as artistic expression, but in the terms of journalism. Well, they do an interview. Ira Glass, who's the host of This American Life, does an interview with this Mike Daisey, and he says to him, basically, you lied to me. And Daisey's trying to make the argument, no, I didn't lie to you. I didn't lie to you. What happened was I didn't make clear enough that I was using the theater genre for this genre. So here's a little bit from the interview of this week's show from This American Life, where Ira Glass is confronting this Mike Daisey to say, shouldn't you say that your live stage show is an act of fiction rather than an act of personal testimony? So here's how this plays out. And here's why I think this is important. I think that this is where a lot of folks, when they hear people like me, progressives like me, talk about the Bible, and I want to say, look, the Bible is not trying to tell a literalistic story of some of these happenings, but rather it's telling a larger truth. They feel like they're Ira Glass, and the Bible is this Mike Daisey. This is where I think there's a connection to this to this religious style, that we have this struggle when someone wants to switch genre. So here Ira Glass is raising this question of, do you think you should fairly label your show as an act of fiction? And here's where that conversation picks up.
Are you going to change the way that you label this in the theater? So that the audience in the theater knows that this isn't, strictly speaking, a work of truth, but in fact what they're seeing is really a work of fiction that has some true elements in it.
But I don't know that I would say in a theatrical context that it isn't true. But I believe that when I perform it in a theatrical context in the theater, that when people hear the story in those terms, that we have different languages for what the truth means.
I understand that you believe that, but I think you're kidding yourself in the way that normal people who go to see a person talk, people take it as a literal truth. I thought the story was literally true, seeing it in the theater. Brian, who's seen other shows of yours, thought all of them were true. I saw your nuclear show. I thought that was completely true. Like I thought it was true because you were on stage saying, this happened to me. I took you at your word.
I think you can trust my word in the context of the theater and how people see it.
I find this to be like a really hedgy answer. I think it's okay for somebody in your position to say that it isn't all literally true. Do you know what I mean? I feel like actually it seems like it's honest labeling. And I feel like that's what's actually called for at this point, is just honest labeling. Like you make a nice show, people are moved by it, I was moved by it. And if it were labeled honestly, I think everybody would react differently to it.
I don't think that label covers the totality of what it is.
The label fiction.
Yeah. We have different worldviews on some of these things. I agree that truth is really important.
But I feel like I have the normal worldview. Like the normal worldview is somebody stands on a stage and says, this happened to me. I think it happened to them, unless it's clearly labeled, here's a work of fiction.
I really regret putting the show on This American Life.
So this is an interesting conversation, right? The artist is trying to say, I don't like the category of fiction, I want the category of something else. Fiction doesn't grab it, but also truthful journalism doesn't fit it. And Ira Glass is saying, but here's the problem. You stand up there and say, I saw this thing at the front gate with the guards, or I met this child. Then people are going to say, well, you really did, right? Like, that's the whole basis for me listening to you. And then this Mike Daisey is in this precarious position of having to say, no, people are supposed to understand the genre. And if you understood the genre, which I think Mike Daisey's problem is, he didn't say to people, this is the genre.
Right.
And I think that that's one of the struggles that people have when they hear folks like me and other progressives that we've had on the show. We had Bishop Spong on here a couple of weeks ago talking about the role of the Bible. And he's like, look, you're not supposed to understand the Bible in these literalist terms. You're supposed to understand it in this other way. And this, listening to this story on This American Life, gave me greater empathy for people who hear that and are like, well, how is anybody supposed to know that? You just open up the Bible and you read it, and it sounds like a guy says he saw this thing happen, or it just purports. And then the king went to this place and slaughtered 100,000 people. You're supposed to then say to yourself, well, know the genre, that's not actually how you're supposed to understand that. It feels like it's been mislabeled, that when you call it the Bible, our understanding of the Bible is, well, it's the truth about what happened. And then when you say, well, it's the truth in the larger sense, not the truth in the literalist sense, people find themselves at their wits' end trying to say, how does this possibly make any sense? So stick with us here. We'll chat about this a little bit more after the break. And if you've got comments yourself, give us a call, 952-946-6205. That's 952-946-6205. And we'll chat a little bit about the issues raised in this story and how it should impact the way that some of us find ourselves talking about the Bible, where it feels like we're asking people to do this very same thing. On AM 950, the Progressive Voice of Minnesota, and DougBadgerRadio.com.